All right, let's talk about Dunkirk. We all think we know the story, right? This incredible moment of national survival, this defining legend. But what if I told you the story you know? Well, it might not be the whole story. See, it before it was a miracle. You have to understand it was an absolute catastrophe. I mean, just listen to how the British Prime Minister himself, Winston Churchill, put it. It's late May 1940, and the British Expeditionary Force is completely trapped on the coast of France. They've got their backs to the sea, and the German army is closing in fast. This wasn't some heroic last stand. Not yet. This was the brink of total annihilation. So what was the miracle of Dunkirk? The answer seems pretty simple, right? A bunch of little civilian boats sail over and rescue an army. But as we're about to find out, the real story is, well, it's way more complex. It's more organized, and it includes heroes and entire fleets that have been almost completely forgotten. Okay, so let's dive into the official story first. The rescue mission had a code name, Operation Dynamo. It kicked off on the evening of May 26th, and really, it was just this desperate last-ditch effort to get an entire army off the beaches of France and somehow, get them back across the English Channel. And this is the number that really defines the miracle. 338,226. In just 9 absolutely frantic days, that's how many British and Allied soldiers were pulled from the beaches and the harbor at Dunkirk. It was an astonishing number, a figure that honestly nobody believed was even remotely possible. And the gap between what they hoped for and what they actually achieved is just staggering. The guy in charge, Vice Admiral Ramsay, his initial goal was seen as a forlorn hope, a long shot. He was thinking, maybe we can save 45,000 guys in 2 days before it's all over. So to go from that to over 338,000, yeah, you can see why they called it a miracle. And this whole thing happened in just 9 days. 9 frantic, chaotic days. It was this whirlwind of logistics and sheer bravery, all being coordinated from secret wartime tunnels buried deep under Dover Castle. I mean, the situation was changing by the hour. And then on May 28th, the Belgian army surrendered, which just cranked up the desperation to a whole new level. All right, let's get to the part of the story everyone knows and loves, the little ships. That armada of civilian boats, it's such a powerful image, right? A whole nation coming together. But let's take a closer look at who was really steering those boats. So here's the problem they were facing. It was just simple physics, really. The big Royal Navy destroyers, the ships that could carry hundreds of men, couldn't get close to the beach. The water was just too shallow. You had soldiers waiting out for hours in freezing, shoulder-deep water, trying to reach them. So what's the solution? The call goes out for any boat with a shallow draft, basically a flat bottom, that could act like a shuttle, a ferry, from the beach out to the big warships. And wow, did people respond. Nearly 850 private boats answered that call. You had incredible stories like the Sundowner. Her owner was Charles Lightlawler. Get this, he was the former second officer on the Titanic. He refused to let anyone else sail his boat, went over himself, and rescued 127 men. Then there was the Tamzine, a tiny fishing boat less than 15 feet long, and the Medway Queen, a paddle steamer that made 7 trips and saved 7,000 soldiers. They called her the heroine of Dunkirk. But this is where the popular story gets a little complicated. That image we have, of dentists and accountants grabbing their boat keys and sailing off to war, it's a great story, but it's mostly a myth. Sure, a few owners, like Lightoller, insisted on going, but the vast majority of these little ships were actually crewed by Royal Navy officers and experienced volunteers. This wasn't just a spontaneous civilian free-for-all, it was a highly organized military operation. And it gets even bigger. The fleet wasn't just English pleasure yachts, not by a long shot. There were 39 Dutch coasters, ships that had just escaped the German invasion of their own country, and they ended up rescuing over 22,000 men. 65 Belgian fishing boats joined in. Even 19 official lifeboats were pulled into service. This little ship's armada was a truly international effort. Okay, now we're going to get into a part of the Dunkirk story that has been almost completely erased from the popular version. It's a part that really reminds you that this wasn't just about Britain. It was about the British Empire, even in what felt like a purely British moment of survival. Just listen to this. It's a line of poetry from a soldier named Navash Ali, who was from what is now Pakistan. It's a gut-wrenching, deeply personal look at what it felt like to be one of the forgotten men of Dunkirk. stranded in a foreign war, just dreaming of the food from home.
So who were these men? They were part of something called Force K6. These were 4 animal transport companies from the British Indian Army. They were Muslim soldiers, and they were in France with their mules, providing absolutely vital logistical support to the British forces. And yes, they were on the beaches at Dunkirk, but you almost never hear their story.
The problem is the miracle of the evacuation. It didn't extend to most of them. In one of their companies, something like 85% of the soldiers were left behind. They were captured by the Germans, and for them, the war took a very, very different turn, leading to years as prisoners of war. And once they were in the POW camps, they faced this intense pressure. You had German propagandists, but also a prominent Indian nationalist leader, Subhash Chandra Bose, who had allied with the Axis. They were all trying to get these soldiers to switch sides, to fight against the British. But even with all that pressure, the overwhelming majority refused. They stayed loyal and remained prisoners for the rest of the war. You know, this story of Dunkirk pretty much always ends on June 4th when the last boat leaves. But for thousands of Allied soldiers still stuck in France, the ordeal was, well, it was a long way from over. Take a look at this. It's a pamphlet written by a brigadier named Ogier Ward, and it tells the story of what happened after the evacuation. It's a stark reminder that for so many people, June 4th wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a whole new, desperate fight to survive and escape. And Ward's story is just, it's total chaos. He talks about this desperate struggle to set up medical services, to find any other port, any other way out, all while the German army is just swallowing France whole. It completely shatters that idea of a clean getaway and paints this brutal picture of what was still happening for weeks after the so-called miracle was over. And finally, let's talk about the speech. The one piece of rhetoric that really cemented the Dunkirk legend in our minds and defined what we call the Dunkirk spirit for generations to come. You know the words, "We shall fight on the beaches." They are, without a doubt, some of the most famous words of the 20th century. Churchill delivered that speech in the House of Commons on June 4th, 1940, the exact day the evacuation ended. And with those words, he took an unbelievable military defeat and transformed it into this incredible moment of defiance. But here's the thing, and it's a pretty big detail. That powerful image we all have of the entire nation huddled around their radios, listening to Churchill's voice, it never happened. The speech was only delivered in the House of Commons to the members of Parliament who were there. People read about it in the newspapers, sure, but the public didn't actually hear a recording of Churchill saying those iconic words until after World War II was over. And yet, despite all of it, the complexities, the myths, the forgotten stories, the legend of Dunkirk created something incredibly powerful. The Dunkirk spirit. It became this cornerstone of Britain's identity during the war. It was a symbol of a nation's will to just pull together when things were at their absolute worst. And honestly, it's a phrase that still echoes today. So what Dunkirk really teaches us is that history is never, ever as simple as the stories we like to tell ourselves. It's this messy, complicated tapestry. It's woven from organized naval plans, international fleets, forgotten soldiers from all corners of an empire, and yeah, from legends that sometimes become even more powerful than the facts. And it really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? If the story we all know about Dunkirk is this incomplete, what other histories are still out there just waiting on the beaches to be discovered?